As we end off 2023 with a special communion message, I came up with a title for today's message to end off the year. The title is this. It's called Faithful, Facing the New Year with Strength. Facing the year with strength. And the reason for that is this, is that there are a lot of fears that are out there in the world. I mean, there's so much uncertainty, right? I mean, you think about it, right now people are uncertain about the economy and where that's going to lead. And so there's fear of the, finances heading into the new year. And so, but there's a lot of fears. And all of us have fear to a certain extent. For example, I remember there was a movie back in the day, and I did not know that that fear of spiders was so big until I saw the movie Arachnophobia. I didn't even know what arachnophobia was. I was like, what is arachnophobia? Then I watched the movie, I'm like, okay, I have it. Yes, I do. I don't like spiders. Yeah, that's crazy. Now, I have a certain fear, and that is I don't like swimming in the ocean. Now, the reason, it's not really because of the ocean, it's for what's in the ocean. See, I have a fear of sharks. And here's the reason for it. The reason is I was very young when I was allowed to watch this movie. And for those of you who know what the movie is, you guys can guess it? Jaws. Yes. Why did they let me watch that so young? I couldn't believe that. I was like, what? There's giant fish that will eat you? What? That's insane. I was like, no way. So I remember as an adult, I had a buddy of mine. We went down to California. He's like, hey, I want to show you how to surf. And I was like, all right. So I got on a surfboard and I went out there. And while we were out there, I was like perfectly okay. I was straddling the surfboard. My feet were hanging down. And I was like, hey, there's no sharks here, right? And he's all, dude, it's California. Yeah, there's sharks. I'm like, what? While I was out there, I was just floating. All I hear is, dun 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 dun. And I'm like, I hope this shark doesn't like Mexican food. I'm like, I'm going to be in trouble. I look like a giant fajita right here. I'm like, And I was like, man, I got out of there. I was like, I'm done. I'm good. I don't want to do this. And so it's not really the water that I'm afraid of. It's more of what's in the water or the fact that you can't see the bottom. I don't like water that I can't see the bottom. If I can see the bottom, I'm like, okay, I can see there's nothing there. Okay, I'm good, right? But there's all kinds of fears that we have in our lives. But you know that one of the greatest fears is the fear of the unknown? The fear of not knowing what's going to happen in the future. Not being certain about what's going to take place. Like what's on the other side of this hill? What's on the other side of this obstacle? The fear of the unknown is one of the greatest fears that people have. And if you think about it, we're going to start 2024 tomorrow, and we have a certain level of uncertainty when it comes to 2024. Like, we don't know what the year is going to hold. Like, we don't know what ups we're going to have, what downs we're going to have. When we went into 2020, I still remember in the first part of that year, we're like, yes, it's going to be a great year. Who would have known? Right? All of a sudden, everything, the entire world was impacted, was affected, and we still are feeling the ripple effects of what took place there. So as we look at 2024 now, and we're looking at the new year, you're going, are there going to be any things that are uncertain? What does the future hold? I want you to know something. We might not know what the future holds, but today I want to show you that we can have confidence in the one who holds the future. That God's already there. See, we might not know what's going to happen, but God already does. And God's already there. No matter what storm, no matter what obstacle, no matter what giant situation is going to be a part of our life, God is already there, and God has already prepared a way to help us get through and give us victory in that situation. And so as we head into the new year, it's easy to say, well, we know that God is omnipotent, He's all powerful, He's omniscient, He's everywhere, and so God is so big and so great, right? But as you head into the new year, it's like we're putting our trust in God. But how do we know that we can trust God for the future? Well, one of the ways is by understanding God's faithfulness in the past. And so today what we're going to do is this. As we head into the new year, we're going to stop for a moment, and we're going to focus on and remember what God has already done. Because when you see that God is the same, that's why I love that song, The Same God. Because God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And if God was faithful then, guess what? That song, I said it. He is faithful today, and He will be faithful tomorrow. So when we understand who God is, we understand what God has done, it helps us to move forward knowing, you know what, God? I know You have my future. And it doesn't matter what big, giant thing you're going to face. Remember what He's gotten you through helps you with whatever giant situation is ahead of you. It reminds me of King David. Before he was king, he was just, a young man, young boy. And one day his dad tells him, hey, I want you to go and I want you to take food to your brothers. And they were over there in the battlefield. And when he gets there, there's Goliath and he's on the other side and he's taunting God's people. He's taunting God. He's saying some things and he's like, who is this guy? And David gets mad. He's like, who is this uncircumcised Philistine? That's cussing in the Bible right there. He's like, what? He's like, how dare this guy? How dare this guy who take on our God? So he goes to King Saul and he says, Saul, I will go and fight this guy. And Saul says, wait a second. You don't understand. You see, you're just a boy. He's been fighting since he was a boy. This guy is a giant. He's been trained for this. He will destroy you. And I love what David said in that moment. He says, King, see, when I was tending after my sheep, because he was a shepherd, when I was tending after the sheep, I would go out. And you know that a shepherd, every time he takes a sheep out, he's there to protect them with his life. He's like, I'm ready. I was ready. And he said, so if there's any person who's going to come in, he's like, there was lions and bears that came in and tried to drag my sheep away. He's like, I grabbed them by the beard. Now, you got to know, that dude was crazy. If I see a lion, I'm like, I guess I'll get another sheep someday. Right? I'd be like, wow. But he's like, he grabbed him. He's like, no. He said, you know what? God gave me victory. If God was faithful then, he will be faithful now. God will help us to face and take down this giant. So church, that's what today's going to be about. You know, there's a guy, his name was Asaph. He actually wrote some of the Psalms during King David's reign and King Solomon's reign. And as he wrote some of the Psalms, one of the Psalms that stood out to me was in Psalm 77, where he starts off in that Psalm by talking about the devastation that he's going through. There was levels of uncertainty. There was level of pain. And he was in a moment where he's like crying out to God. And he says, God, are you there? God, are you hearing me? God, have you left us? Have you forgotten me? So he literally gets to a point of he's feeling all this pressure, all this uncertainty into the future. He's like, God, have you forgotten me? And right after he says that, he says this in Psalm 77, verse 11. He literally just said, God, I'm going through this. I'm afraid. I don't know what I'm going to do. And then he says this. But then I recall all you have done, O Lord. I remember your wonderful deeds of long ago. They are constantly in my thoughts. I cannot stop thinking about your mighty works. He says that when I'm facing uncertainty, when I'm facing a struggle, when I'm facing a problem, I know that might scream really loud, but then I stop. He calms his mind. He says, and then I just start thinking about all your mighty works. God, I start thinking about all that you have done. You know what he's saying there? God, I remember about your faithfulness. You know that God is always faithful? We're not, but he is. He's like, God, I remember what you've done. I remember what you did long ago. I remember all the things that you have done. And because of that, God, as I face this situation, I can move forward with confidence. Why? Because I know who you are. Church, the same thing's true with us. As we head into 2024, as a leadership team, as a staff at here at the church, that we dream and we think about what the next year is going to hold. Like there's a calendar in our office right now. It's a big old wall calendar, and we're writing on there different seminars. When I'm going to teach the growing kids God's way kind of seminar, how we're going to raise your child in a godly home, or when we're going to do our dedication weekends. When are we going to do? Like we start planning out the year, and it doesn't start just in one day. Like we spent time in November and December. We really spent almost like 2 months of thinking and writing stuff in and going, okay, that's not going to work there. And we start changing things, and we go into it, that anticipation as to, look, here's some things that God is going to do. But I want you to know the reason that we can move forward with that anticipation is because we step back and remember what God has already done. When we do our meeting that we're planning for the next year, we do stop and we think about, like, look at all these victories. One of the things that we do is we take a board and we write out all the things that we dreamt about last year, right? And so here's all the things that we were hoping to get done this year. And it's so cool at the end of the year to come back and go, oh, God did that, God did that, God did that. God. You're like, whoa! So before we get into planning for the next year, we go, look at what God has already done. That's so important. And church, can we just stop for a moment? As we're looking into the new year, what God's going to do through our church family, and let's just be thankful for what he's done already. This year was unbelievable as a church family. I started thinking about this week, and I got emotional just thinking about it, processing all the things that God has done. And, I kind of worked my way backwards throughout the year. on all things that God did this year. I started thinking about like our big community Christmas. Well, first of all, Christmas Eve services was massive. We had so many people here. The kids' play was unbelievable. There's one little guy just dancing. One little girl wouldn't let go of her mom, was like, no, you're not going anywhere, right? But then I thought about community Christmas and how community Christmas, how many people we got to help. Do you know that we gave out 400 hot meals on community Christmas to families in need? I think it was 375 people that were helped. We gave gifts where it was the kids got shoes, a coat, hygiene supplies. We gave out a toy. I mean, that some of these families were not going to have a Christmas, and we were able to provide Christmas for some of these kids. It's unbelievable. And then, yeah, you can get that up, absolutely. And then I started thinking about our big Thanksgiving celebration. Because Thanksgiving celebration, we had a big one, and where we invite a community. And this is one that we share a meal. We say, hey, you're not going to take a meal. You're going to come in. We're going to have a meal together. And we served over 350 people on our big, big Thanksgiving weekend where people got a hot meal. And some of those families would not have had a Thanksgiving meal this year. But we provided that for them. I started thinking back about, what we do at the lot. And we have people who serve at the lot regularly. And they go out. And one Sunday a month, we go out to the lot. And we provide a hot meal. And we partner with an organization that helps provide them the supplies. And then we go and make them. And we take them out and we serve the community there. And do you know that this year, we served over 1,800 hot meals to families and homeless here through the lot alone. I mean, that is unbelievable. You can get that up. I then started thinking about, our Fridays here. We have the Friday produce giveaway where we do it in the first part of the year. Then during the summer, there's not a lot of produce. But then it comes back in the fall. And so we hand out thousands of pounds of produce on the third Friday of the month. And I want you to know, I started looking at this. I think the last one we did was like 20,000 pounds of produce. So if you look at the entire year, I was going back and adding it up. We served somewhere between 75,000 pounds to 100,000 pounds of fresh produce in 2023. I mean, how incredible is that? And thank you to the Community Food Bank for partnering with us, for that. On the first, second, and fourth Friday of the month, we partner with ICS Food Pantry. And seriously, every Friday, people can come here and get food. Hundreds and hundreds of people get food from that. Every Friday, we have people who serve in that incredible missions ministry. We have our food and clothing ministry. You know that every single Sunday, if you need clothing or you need food, you can go to our food and clothing ministry and you can get a bag of each one. No questions asked. Hey, I'm in need. Here you go. Here you go. So, and every single week we have people who go and they get a bag of food, get some clothing. We're able to provide that because of what God has done. God moving the hearts and the lives of people. God being so generous to allow us to be a part of that. Church, the hundreds of people that come here and get to listen to the message of Jesus. And we've seen so many people come to Christ. People who didn't know Jesus that through our church family committed their life to Christ. And we're going to show you a video a little later in the service of the people that committed their life to Jesus and got baptized this year and said, I'm all in. This year, we looked at our numbers. We grew by 30% as a church family. Now, you can get that up, absolutely. I've had people tell me this, why do you keep track of that? That's weird that you guys know how many people go to your church. And I'm like, really? I want to tell you something. Every person that walks through those doors, every one of you, you matter to God. You're a soul that matters to God, and you matter to us. God loves you, and we love you, and we're here to serve you the best way that we can to help you grow in your relationship with Jesus. So yes, we care about that. We love the fact that God is growing our church family and having an eternal impact in our community. That's huge. That's huge. It just shows God's faithfulness. But did you notice what Asaph said? Asaph, in that text, he didn't just talk about God. I remember all the great things that you did in my life or through my life or through our church, right? He said, I remember the great things you did long ago. He's pointing back to what God did in history through other people. And I want you to know that sometimes as we're facing uncertainty, as we're facing something in the future, one of the best things to do is as you move forward in confidence in God into whatever that uncertainty is for you, and it's not uncertain for him, but for us, is to step back and remember what God did through others as well. And so what I want to do the rest of today, we're going to spend some time looking at some heroes of the faith. These incredible heroes. And we're going to learn 3 principles from these heroes in Hebrews chapter 11. If you ever, I encourage you, go read the entire chapter, Hebrews chapter 11. It's the great heroes of the faith that it points back to the heroes of the Old Testament and what they did and how they trusted in God. I mean, it's an unbelievable chapter. But then in chapter 12, it's a summary. The first part of it is a summary of chapter 11. It's saying, look at all these guys did all this. Now, this is what it means to you because of these heroes of the faith. So here in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 and 2, it says this. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith. So he's talking about all those heroes of the faith in Hebrews 11, and we're going to look at some of those heroes right now. Let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. See, it says, hey, as we're looking at the future, we're looking at moving forward, and we're looking forward, into what God wants for us, you got to get rid of stuff that is going to weigh you down. If I'm trying to hike, and I have this big old giant backpack with a bunch of rocks in it, it's going to slow me down. He's like, strip all that stuff off so that you can move forward into the life that God has for you. But he says, but here's how you do it, is by looking back. He says, consider these people, that we have such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith. He says, go back and look at all these incredible heroes. So we're going to look at 3 heroes today from Hebrews 11. The first one we're going to look at is Abraham. Abraham, if you've been in church a long time, Abraham, you would teach it to the kids, Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them. And so, okay, I'm sorry. All right, anyway. This is a guy, he has a song written after him, right? We teach kids about Father Abraham. And the reason we teach them about Father Abraham is because of his faith, because of his belief in God. But here's the thing, we're going to learn from Father Abraham is this, that if you want to step into a future with confidence, you got to believe in God's power, not necessarily your own. See, sometimes the reason that we don't go into something with confidence is because we don't have the ability, we don't have the power. Is this going to be a storm, a situation that maybe I cannot face? But I want you to know that it's not about facing something alone. God never intended for us to face it alone. And Abraham, he believed in God's power. Now, there's a difference between believing in God's power or in someone's power, when from a distance versus believing in someone's power when it actually affects you. Let me show you what I mean. I heard this story years and years back. It really impacted me. And it just talked about, the levels of belief that we have. So there's a guy, and he was a tightrope walker, right? So he walked the tightrope, and he took a tightrope and he put it across Niagara Falls. And so he goes out there and he's walking the tightrope. He gets there, and then what he does is he grabs a wheelbarrow and he starts taking the tightrope and the wheelbarrow, and he starts walking on the tightrope. And he's walking. And he turns around and looks at the crowd. He's like, hey, do you guys believe that I can do this with someone sitting in the wheelbarrow? Everyone was like, yeah. He's like, any volunteers? Crickets. No one volunteered. Everyone's like, See, there's a difference. Like, I believe you can do it, but if it means something to me, then maybe my belief isn't quite there. See, I believe with an extent, or to an extent. See, Abraham believed completely. That's why he's in Hebrews chapter 11. Let me show you what I mean. Here, in verses 17 and 18, what did he believe? And what did Abraham do? Have you ever thought about that? Like, what did Abraham do to be written in the book of the heroes of the faith, in the chapter of the heroes? Here's what it says. It's kind of crazy. Just FYI. It was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him. Abraham, who had received God's promises, was ready to sacrifice his only son, Isaac, even though God had told him, Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted. Say what? Like, okay, wait a second. So Abraham is counted as a great person of the faith, and what did he do? It says that he trusted God. He said, God made him a promise. And the promise God made him was this. He said, you're going to have more descendants that you can count. It's going to be massive. And it's going to be through your son, Isaac. So it's going to be you, Isaac, and then you're going to have all these kids. So he's like, okay, cool, I believe that. Then God tested him and said, hey, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take your son and you're going to go sacrifice him to me. Just so you know what that means is, he's like, I want you to go and do this. And Abraham goes, okay. What? I mean, That seems a little extreme, right? The only thing I kept thinking about is maybe Isaac was naughty. Because there's been a couple times I was like, oh, God, I will sacrifice one right now to you. Maybe, I don't know. But in this moment, but here's why he did this. And here's why it was shown as he was a great person of faith. It's because he believed God's promise. God made him a promise. Through Isaac, you're going to have all these descendants. So what did he know that maybe we don't know? The very next verse. Look what it says here. The very next verse. Why was he willing to do this? Verse 19. Abraham reasoned. He thought about this. He's like, you know what? God made me a promise. He reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able to bring him back to life again. And in a sense, Abraham did receive his son back from the dead. He's like, you know what, God? I would do whatever it takes. He said, you know what, God? I believe that you can do the impossible. That's what he's saying here. Now, it's interesting because now scholars look back and they point back to this moment. They're like, you know what God was doing, and through that testing, he was showing what God was willing to do through Jesus, coming and dying on the cross, pay the price for our sin, giving up his one and only son. And Abraham didn't know that. See, we know it now because we can go back and read and see that Jesus was throughout the entire Bible, but he's in the middle. I mean, he's right there at the beginning, and he's like, you know what? I don't know, but here's what I do know. God made me a promise, and if God is calling me to this, I know that God can do the impossible. You know what he did? Not only did he believe in God's promise, he also believed in God's power to fulfill his promise. You know that God will call us to that in our life sometimes? There are times when God will ask us, do you believe that I can do this? And we say yes, and God says, get in the wheelbarrow. Let's see if you believe. Do you know that giving to God financially is one of the tests? People think it's because God needs people's money. God doesn't need our money. He owns everything. When we give to God, what we're showing God is, God, I trust you. Go back and read Malachi chapter 3, where God says, Malachi chapter 3, verse 10, it says this. It says, God says, test me in this. That if you give, he says, that I will not fill your barns and they will be overflowing. God says, put me to the test. Do you trust me? Are you willing to get in the wheelbarrow? See, some of us go, God, I trust you with everything. Not my wallet. Or it could be trusting God with forgiving someone. Where God says, hey, you forgive them. You let it go. And God says, let me handle it. God says that he's the one that provides the wrath. He's going to provide the discipline in that situation. It's hard to do. When we hang on to resentment, this person did this to me, and resentment and anger and bitterness, and we're going to hang on to it. And God says, I don't want you to. I want you to let it go. I will take care of it. I will provide the right justice. God is asking us, do you trust me in this? See, sometimes we feel like the way we're going to heal is by hanging on to the hurt. No! You don't heal by hanging on to hurt. You heal by handing it over and then allowing God to begin to heal you. So it's got to start there. Maybe we trust them with an addiction. Well, we're trying to do it on our own, and God says, are you done trying? And are you ready to trust? Focus on me. I can do the impossible. I know right now you feel like it's impossible for me to get rid of this thing. God says, I can do the impossible. See, that's what Abraham believed. He said, God, he made me a promise, and if it means he brings him back from the dead, God can do that. Or maybe it's a broken relationship, and you think it's over. You think that now maybe you got a divorce, and now your life is over, everything is broken, and it's never going to be right again, and God says, no, I can restore you. He can restore you, whether it's restoring that relationship or restore you through a different relationship. God's not done with you yet. Do we believe that God can do the impossible? So that's the first thing that we learned through Abraham. Now the next person we're going to talk about is Rahab. Now Rahab had an interesting occupation. Let's just say this, okay? But through Rahab, here's what we're going to learn. We're going to learn that in order for you to move forward with confidence, that you've got to believe your future can be better. Now I've been in ministry, coming up in February, it'll be 22 years that I've been in ministry since I was ordained. And yeah, thank you. I know, can you believe it? I'm only 27. How did that happen? And in these 22 years of ministry, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people. who felt that they had no hope, who felt like their best days are behind them, who felt that maybe they were disqualified because of all these things that they did, that they can go back and look at their life and say, but I regretted that, I regretted that, I regretted that. And they can point back to all these things they did over the years, up to that current moment where they just felt, right now, I feel like I've missed my chance. Like there's no more, like there's nothing that God can do. And I want you to know something, church. This is what I show them. And if this is how you feel, I want to show you right now that in Christ, your future can be better. You know, have you noticed that when I end my services, I say that with Jesus, the best is yet to come? I've had people, I had one person actually, critique me about that. They're like, oh, why do you say that? I'm like, because I believe it. I believe it. And I believe it's true. Let me show you this. In Jesus, we get heaven for all of eternity. Is heaven better than right now? So is the best yet to come? Yes, it is. If someone doesn't have a relationship with Jesus, they've been living for themselves, they've been following their own desires, and they give their life to Christ, do I believe that now Christ, that the best is yet to come in their life? Yes. God will do something, just the weight of guilt being removed from someone's life, to walk forward and going, I don't have to live in shame and regret and guilt any longer, and I can move forward in the purpose and life that God has for me. Yes. And that's what we see through Rahab. See, Rahab did not allow her past to dictate her future, and she's known as a great person of the faith. Listen to what it says here about Rahab. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 31, it says this. It was by faith that Rahab, the prostitute, now, let me say this. The prostitute was not her last name. It was her occupation, okay? It was her job where she was. She was not godly, I'll just say that, okay? All right, there we go. It was by faith that Rahab the prostitute was not destroyed with the people in her city who refused to obey God. She was not destroyed in the city with her people who refused to obey God. Okay, I'll come back to that. For she had given a friendly welcome to the spies, to God's people that went into that area. Now I want you to see there. It says that she was not destroyed because God didn't count her as the same as the people that refused to obey him. Let's just go ahead and admit, her job required disobedience to God. Like literally, she was disobeying God in what she did in her life until she met God's people. Until she was impacted by God and her life completely changed. From that moment, her life changed completely. Like she didn't go back to that. I think it's messed up that in Hebrews 11, we're referring back to that. I'm going, how about refer to her, to the person that God restored, to the person that God did something unbelievable, to the person that later on, went on and brought up, she married one of God's people and then went on to be within the genealogy of Jesus. You're like, oh my goodness, but we refer to her as Rahab the sketchy job. But it said, from that moment, she did not go back because she believed God had a better future for her. And so she helped God's people. Not only did she help God's people, she became a part of God's people. She did not allow her past to define her future. And now she's written in Hebrews 11 as one of the great heroes of the faith. I love that she's written later on, thousands of years after her life, she's written about as a great person in the faith. But I want you to know, Hebrews is not the greatest book that has her name in it. It's the book of life. The Bible tells us that when we give our life to God, that our name is written in the book of life. And in the book of life, our name is written for all of eternity. It's the people that are in heaven. And so I want you to know that she gave life to God. She changed her whole life. She's written in the book of life. And us as Christians, as followers of Jesus, our name gets written in there too. God changes not just our now, but our eternity. And so what I want to do for a moment is that we're going to celebrate really quick by showing you the people that, just like Rahab, see, Rahab said, God, I'm all in. I'm all in. I'm not going to let the past define me. I'm going to move forward in the future that you have for me. And this year we had so many people that said, Jesus, I'm all in, and got baptized. So let's go ahead and show you that quick video now. Whew. You know, it's so hard not to get emotional. We have an opportunity through our church family to grow the family of God. It's just unbelievable. We're so grateful, so thankful for what God has done. And the best is yet to come. I love what it said, the Romans 8:1. Therefore, those who are in Christ, there is no longer no condemnation. But we know where we're going to be for all of eternity. See, we got to believe that your future can be better. And the last thing we're going to look at, last person we're going to look at, is Moses. And through Moses, what we're going to do is we're going to see that as we believe God, and as we step into the future, and we see maybe the future is going to be uncertain, is that we believe him not just with our words, but we believe him with our actions. And so believing God through action. By saying, God, I'm willing to get in the wheelbarrow. Like, God, I don't know what's going to happen, but I trust you. I believe in you. See, Abraham and Rahab, they were willing to do something. They did something about it. Abraham goes, hey, son, let's go for a walk. And then you look at Rahab. She's like, hey, I'm going to trust, and I'm going to help God's people. Even though, do you know that it could have cost her life? Like, if they would have found out, the people that were there in this terrible culture would have killed her. But she was willing to take that step of faith. I want you to know something, church, that if we're going to grow in our faith and you're going to walk with God, to walk with God just means this. It means that you live your life in relationship with him. And as you live your life in relationship with God, God is going to ask you to take a step of faith. Sometimes that step is big. Sometimes that step will be get out of your comfort zone in what God wants to do in your life. And so that's what we see through Moses. Because there was a time when Moses was very comfortable. And, he was orphaned, put down the river. Pharaoh's daughter goes and picks him up and raises him up as his own, as her own. And he was wealthy. Like, he had everything he could have wanted in this ugly pagan culture. From a physical perspective, he had money, he had possessions, he had all this stuff. And listen to what the Bible says about him in the action he was willing to take for God. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 24, it says this. It was by faith that Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to share the oppression of God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. He's saying, look, he could have stayed in that ugly place. He could have just kept enjoying it. Could have had what he wanted from a physical perspective. But he's like, but I know. See, sin's pleasures are always temporary. And then it goes on. He thought it was better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of Egypt. For he was looking ahead at his great reward. He's looking at the big picture. See, we got to do that. We're going to keep our eye on the big picture, the big reward, heaven. It was by faith that Moses left the land of Egypt. Not fearing the king's anger, he kept right on going because he kept his eyes on the one who is invisible. Now I want you to see this. Moses was willing to be uncomfortable. He literally, there was two times that this actually happened. First of all, he was very comfortable when he was under Pharaoh, and he was raised up as an Egyptian in this ugly pagan culture, and he's like, look, but he had, physically speaking, he had what anybody would want, but he's like, no, this is wrong. And so one day he sees an Egyptian mistreating one of the Israelites, and he's like, look, I'm not okay with that. So he goes to protect him. He actually ends up killing the Egyptian. So then after that, he gets scared, and so he ran away. And as he ran away, he went to like this remote area, and while he's there, he meets a woman, and now, he's got this new life, and he has a new family, and he's now at a place where it's very comfortable again. So it's not Egypt with all the stuff, but hey, he's got some animals, he's got things, his life is comfortable, he's kind of heading into retirement, like, you know what, I'm good right here. And then in that moment, God calls him and says, no, I need you to go, and you're going to let my people go out of captivity. And Moses, through this, is interesting because he's in the book of faith. If you go back and read the conversation that God had with him, several times he's like, are you sure, God? Like, I don't know. He literally thought of every excuse. And one of the last excuses, he's like, God, I don't speak very well. And God's like, are you kidding me? Who gave you the ability to speak? I got this, right? So finally he's like, okay, God, I'm going to go. And he had to leave his comfort again to go face the most powerful man in the known world, Pharaoh. And so as he does this, he takes God's people, and then you notice what it said there. It said that he was able to stand up to Pharaoh. He left all the things of the king, and he said this, he did not fear him. Why? Because his eyes were on the one who is invisible. His eyes were always on God. He said, I'm focused on God, on God's purpose, God's plan for my life. He was willing to be uncomfortable to fulfill God's plan for his life. Church, are we willing to do that? You know, a lot of times what we want comfort Christianity, and God says, you don't understand, there will be times I will take you out of your comfort zone to lead you into a greater purpose. If you go back and read the heroes of the faith, they were not comfortable at certain times in their life, but that's what caused them to be great people of the faith. Again, Rahab put her life on the line. Moses was willing to stand up to the anger and the wrath of the most powerful man. But here's what he knew. You know what? He might be the most powerful man, but he's not even close to the power of my God. He's like a little ant in his hands. So he's like, I'm going to keep my eyes on God. And so now as we wrap up chapter 11, let's go ahead and look at chapter 12 again, that reference back to that whole chapter. And this is where we started off in the verse. And I'm going to show you the second verse that follows it. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, those are the people we talked about, and there's so many more in Hebrews 11 if you want to go back and look. Let us strip off every weight that slows us down, and especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And we're going to spend some time next week looking at that. And let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. Now he is seated in the place of honor beside God's throne at the right hand of God. But I want you to see what it says here. It says, just like them. Just like them. Just like Moses, his eyes were on the one who is invisible. His eyes were on God. He's the one that was speaking to him. He's like, this is God's plan for my life. It says that the way that we're going to move forward with faith and confidence into a new year or into anything uncertain says, you keep your eyes not on the uncertainty, but you keep your eyes on Jesus. You know why God did great things through their life? Is because they not because they're choking. It's because they weren't so concerned about what they did. It wasn't about what they did. They knew it was about what God was going to do through them. See, that's the key. It's not on our strength. It's not on our ability. But it's saying, God, I will be faithful. If you call me to it, God, I believe and I trust that you will see me through it. And so the other thing that it said in that verse, it says, also get rid of every weight and the sin that so easily entangles. And again, we'll go into detail next week on how we can do that. But ask yourself that question. When I think about the sin is just flat out wrong stuff. It's like having big giant potholes as you're going through life. It's going to slow you down. It's going to cause some pain. Throw you off alignment if you hit them. You know, but then it also said, and every weight that so easily entangles. The weight. The rocks that are in your life. Things that are in your life. See, sometimes what we do is we chase after good instead of chasing after God. The weight, anything that slows you down. Sometimes what we do is we're not chasing after the things of God. We just want to just chase comfort. We're going to chase certain things. And it says here, no, get rid of anything that is distracting you from drawing close to God and what God wants for your life. And when you do that, God will help you to fulfill your purpose. And when it's all said and done, you don't have to worry or think about at the end of your life, did I accomplish what God was intended? You can know you accomplished what you were intended to accomplish when your eyes are focused on Jesus. But church, as we look at all these heroes of the faith, the one thing that they did to start this whole thing, it was a decision. And the decision was to say yes to Jesus. To say yes. When God said, are you willing to do this? And they said, I'm all in. Now, if you're here today and you've never given your life to Christ, where you're like, I want that. I want to give my life to Jesus. I want to see God do something unbelievable through my life. I want to see and know that my days ahead are better than the days that I've lived because I know the days that I've lived. But it all starts with that commitment to say, Jesus, I'm all in. So if you've never taken that step of faith, we're going to end in prayer right now. So if you want to close your eyes, bow your head, let's pray. And if that's you today, just repeat after me. Say, Jesus, I give you my life. Jesus, thank you for loving me. I believe you died on the cross to pay the price for my sin. And then you rose again to give me a brand new life. Jesus, I'm not certain about what the future holds, but I know you hold the future. Today I place my life in your hands. Jesus, I give you my life. And I pray this in your holy name. Amen. Now, church, if you prayed that today for the very first time, welcome to the family. Thank you so much for letting us be a part of that. The Bible also talks about that important step of baptism. That's why you have those people get baptized. That important action step of saying, God, I'm going to show you I'm all in, not just tell you I'm all in. So if you've never been baptized, we want to help you with that. Please let us know. And if you made that decision today, please let us know by texting the word New Start to the number up on the screen, or here in the auditorium in the seat back in front of you, there's a connection card. Just put New Start in the comment section and then fill it out and drop it in the giving box. We'll give you a call with more information, because with Jesus, church, the best is yet to come.